Tov, today's Daf Yomi is Bava Kamma Yud Aleph, Bava Kamma 11, but we're going to start on Bava Kamma Yud Amabeis, 5 lines from the bottom. So we discussed yesterday that if there's such a thing that one ox scores another ox, then the ox and kills it, that the carcass is the responsibility of the owner of the ox. Meaning to say, if Reuven's ox scores Shimon's ox, Reuven has to pay Shimon the amount of money of a live ox minus the carcass, because Shimon gets to keep the carcass and do with it whatever he wants. So Amalei Rav Kahana or Rav, and they cite yesterday 3 different psukim to make this point. So the Gemara says that Rav Kahana says to either Rav or Rav, depending on the girsa, time in the cause of Rahmana, what's the reason why the person, the nizak, gets to keep the carcass? The cause of Rahmana, v'ameis yelo, because it says he gets the dead body, meaning to say after his ox is gored, he gets paid, but he has the carcass, meaning to say he doesn't get paid the full amount, he just gets the full amount minus the value of the carcass. But we're not for this pasuk. Havamina nevelo de mazik havya. I would have said that the carcass belongs to the mazik. That doesn't make sense. Hasha yislo ididei kama trefos yavei. Since we already learned that the mazik can pay him whatever he wants, he can pay him in trefos if he wants. He can just give him any animal as a payment. The Amar Yashiv Rabo Shava Kasef. I feel assuming you can pay him even in bran. The day me by. Of course, you could tell him. Of course, he could have paid with the carcass. Why does it have to tell us he could pay with the carcass? So the Gemara says, "Lo nitzracha ela fachas nevelo." No, it's teaching us this halacha that if the carcass deteriorates from the moment it was killed until he's able to get it to court to evaluate it, and the nizak knew about it, that deterioration is the responsibility of the nizak, of the one who is damaged, and not the mazik. So the Gemara says, "Lema pachas nevelo tinahi." Let's say that this deterioration of the carcass is a tanai. Who is responsible for the deterioration of the carcass? Is it the nizak or the mazik? Let's say it's a machokas tanaim. Tanya im tarof itaref, because it says in the brisa, it says in the pasuk in Exodus, im tarof itaref yivieyu aid. That if a person was responsible to watch an animal and he's being paid for it, and the animal was torn apart, he has to bring a witness. Yivieyu aid. He has to bring a witness. What does it mean, Yivieyu aid? So there's a machokas about this. On top of Yud Alpha and Alpha, the Brisa says, Yavi Eidim Shenitrafa Ba'ones Upater, that the Shomer Sachar, the person who's being paid, should bring witnesses that it was torn apart without his negligence, just by an accident, and then he'll be exempt for the damage that was done to this ox. And so therefore Yavi Eidim Shenitrafa Ba'ones Upater. Whereas Abba Shaul says Yavi Eidudo Abezim, that the word aid needs to say, means he brings the carcass to the court. He brings the carcass to the court, and presumably it's to evaluate how much it was worth. And so doesn't the pasuk tell us, isn't the pasuk telling us, my love Bava Kamma? Okay, what's the argument here? The Mar suffer that one must be at the position, nepachas nevela, denizakavi, as in, we must be at the position that the deterioration of the carcass, according to Abba Shaul, is the responsibility of the nizak. And so therefore, since the Abba Shaul is saying that the responsibility is of the nizak, and so therefore he has to bring the carcass and say that this is what it was worth at the time of the death. And so therefore, therefore, that isn't that proof that that's what's going on. He's saying this is what it was worth at the time of death, and so therefore that's what he owes me, and the deterioration is my responsibility. So isn't that the dispute? Whereas the Rabbanan say no, it's the responsibility of the mazik. So therefore, you don't even have to bring. We don't care if it deteriorates. That's going to be the mazik's loss, and so therefore the nizik doesn't have to bring it to the court. Gemara says no. Kuli alma the nizak. Everybody says the deterioration belongs to is the responsibility of the nizak, and he loses the money. Here, what we're talking about is who's the one who has the responsibility to bring it to the arbitrators to decide how much the carcass is worth. Abba Shaul says that it's the mazik's responsibility, and so therefore Yavi Dudo Bezdin, he has to bring the carcass to the court to determine what its value was. Whereas the Rabbanan say it's the responsibility of the Nizak. So therefore, Gemara says, and indeed we have a brisa of Vatanya, and here the Vatanya is bin Yechusa, meaning it's a support. Acherim Omrim, that the Acherim say, the Acherim in the Shas, remember we saw elsewhere is Rebbe Meir. Acherim say, Minayan shal bal habor la'alos shormi bor. How do we know that it's the owner of the pit's responsibility, i.e., the mazik's responsibility to lift the ox out of the pit, as it says, Kesev Yashiv Ba'alav Vehames, meaning to say he has to bring back the money and the deceased ox. And so therefore we see from here that it's the mazik's responsibility to bring the carcass to the court. What are we talking about when we refer to this efforts that he has to do to bring the carcass? If you want to say that in the pit itself, it's worth 1 zuz, but when he brings it up to the top of the pit, it's worth 4. So what do you mean you say it's his responsibility? All he's doing is working for himself, meaning to say, because he gets to deduct the value of the carcass. So if he brings it out, he's raised the value of the carcass. So all he's doing, the Torah Nevela, he's just making himself more money. The Malik's just making himself more money. He's not doing anything for the Nizak. So why would we formulate it that in this manner, that the Torah Nevela is on the Mazik? So what's going on here? So the Gemara explains, no, that's not the case. Amarle, Rava responds back to Abaye, we're talking about a circumstance where when it's in the pit, it's worth a zuz, and even when it's outside the pit, it's worth a zuz. And that's the case. He has to be the one to bring it out of the pit. The Gemara says, is that really a thing? Is that really a thing that inside the pit it's worth a zuz and outside it's also worth a zuz? The Gemara says, yes, the Amriyinchi Kishura B'mata Bezuza, Kishura B'mata Bezuza, Kishura B'dabra Bezuza. If the beam was in the city, it's worth a zuz, and when the beam was in the wilderness, it's also worth a zuz. So it's possible that the beam's value is not dependent upon where it is. So the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel, Ein Shamin lo laganav v'lo lagazlin el nizakin. So this idea of Ein Shamin, Shmuel says, we'll read the Rashi here. The minhag dayanin, the practice of the judges is she'ein shamin lo laganav lo lagazlin, that we don't evaluate for a robber or a thief. That she'im ganav v'gazal behema kelim. That let's say somebody robbed or stole a animal or utensils, v'nifchasu etzlo, and then they went down in price. Ein shamin anavela v'ashvarim v'balam. We don't say sheyachzir ganav ha-pachas. We don't evaluate the carcass and the broken pieces for the value of the owner, that he has to return to the thief the deterioration. But rather, he pays the animal and the utensils the full price, and then he gets to keep the broken parts. Meaning to say, unlike that which we just said, that the carcass of the dead animal belongs to the original owner of the animal, and the person who's outscored pays a difference. We don't say that law with respect to somebody who robbed or stole. Rather, he has to pay the full amount, and he keeps the broken pieces. We're on 11a in the middle of the page. So Shmuel says, Ein shaman lo laganav lo gazlan el nizakin. Shmuel says this is just a law by damages. Va'ani omer, so Shmuel says, and I say, Afwa Shol. And I say, we also do this for the borrower. The borrower is, Shmuel said this first halacha was the practice of the judges, but I say it also applies for the borrower. But we don't know what it means for the borrower. Well, the Gemara is going to discuss that. The Abba modally and father, which is in this case a reference to Rav. Shmuel refers to Rav as Abba. Abba admits to me. So the Gemara says, so what was the teaching of Shmuel? This is what Shmuel was saying. Af was Shol Shaman, And not only do we evaluate, meaning to say that the owner of the object is responsible for gets the broken parts, and the person only has to pay the difference. Not only do we do it by a nizak, by somebody who was damaged, but even by a borrower. Af was shoal shaman. Even for the borrower, we borrow it. Va'aba modeli, and Abba agrees. Udama alchakamar. Or maybe this is what Shmuel is saying. Vani omer af shoel ein shamim. I say even for a borrower, we don't evaluate it. That the borrower is like the robber and the thief. Va'aba modeli. So, and Rav agrees to me. So the Gemara says, well, what's the case? Tashma dahu gavra. There was once a man, Deshel narga michavre. There was once a man who he borrowed an ox from his friend, and tabra, and it broke. So so how much is the person who borrowed it responsible to pay? Also coming to Rav, so he came to Rav. I'm going to show him when narga malia. Go pay him a full axe, meaning to say, don't deduct the broken pieces. Shmamina ain't shaman. We see from here we don't evaluate the broken pieces. He has to pay him just a full new axe. Gemara says, Adarabba, just the opposite. The Amrle Rav Kahana Rav Asi Rav Dina Hachi. From the fact that Rav Kahana Rav Asi said to Rav, is this really the law? Vishasik? And he was quiet. So we see from here that he made a mistake, and he says, okay, Shmamina Shaman, we really do evaluate it. This is the source for the idea that since he was silent, we see from here that in fact he agreed with the refutation of his position. And this teaches us the principle that shtika koda, that silence is like agreeing. Silence is like acceptance. Now is the time for Am Yisrael not to be silent. We need to speak up. Speak up on behalf of Yidden all over the world. Speak up on behalf of Israel, on behalf of the Chayalim. This is the source for the idea that shtika is like oda, that silence is like acceptance. In Mara Marula Marabelazar. So now we learned, he says, Shamin Laganev Uagazlan, that we do this evaluation for a robber and a thief, meaning to say that the broken pieces of the person they stole it from belong to the person they stole it from, and they just have to pay the difference. It's about he just has to pay the difference. Rav Papa Yamar ain't Shamin. Rav Papa says we don't evaluate. Meaning you have to pay the full price. The law is we're not evaluating. They have to give back the full amount. And but for a borrower, we do evaluate it, meaning to say they don't have to give the full amount. They just have to give the difference between the broken pieces and what's missing. Kid the Rav Kahana Rav Asi. Amar Ula. So now that we had this teaching of Ula, we're going to say 6 more teachings of Ula that are not directly relevant, except for the fact that there were statements that were said by Ula. So what do they statements say? The Idmar. So we're going to see the statements of Ula. Amar Ula. Amar Rabbi Lazar. Shliach sheyatzta shilya. A shilya is a placenta. This part of the part of the fetus that comes out. It's called the placenta or amniotic sac. It's one of them. So he says, so let's say the placenta goes out from the mother on Sunday, and then miktsasa b'yom sheni, and part of it goes out on Monday. So we know monila miyom rishon, not rishon. We count from the first day. What are we counting? We know that the first 14 days after a woman gives birth, she's tamei. And after that, the blood that comes out is called dam toar. That it's biblically speaking tahor, not tamei. Rabbinically speaking, we'll say it's tamei. This is for a girl. For a boy, it's 7 days. So the Gemara says, if the shilya comes out, we count from day 1. So Amalei Rava says to Rebbe Lazar, what's the reason? The Rabbi says to Ula, who said in Amar Ula, Amar Rebbe Ula. The Rabbi says to Ula, Ma'adatech, why are you saying he's tamei from day 1? L'chumra. You say, let's be strict and say that the woman will be tamei from day 1 because she gave birth, because there was the placenta. Chumra da'asili dekuo. It's a stringency which is going to lead to a leniency. The kamataras lami rishon, because now you're saying that from day 1 is the first of the 14 days. And so therefore, she's going to be tahor already initially. Ela marava lachush chosheshes. So says Rava, what we're going to say here is lachush, to be concerned that maybe the fetus went out on day 1. chosheshes. We're going to say we're concerned right away. But miyamna, but to count the 14 days of Tumah, lo memanya el hasheni. We count from day 2. So the Gemara, meaning to say the Monday will be the first of the 14 days in order to be lenient for the Dam Torah. So the Gemara says, well, Micah Mashman, what's this teaching us? What's this teaching of Ula? The Aim Mitzah Shilya B'Lovad. Is it telling us that when the placenta comes out, it means that the fetus was born? No. Tanina, didn't we already learn this in a brisa? We learned Shilya Shayatzta Miktasa Asura B'Achila, that if you have a placenta that a little bit went out of an animal, then we're going to say you can't eat the animal at all. So the placenta went out before the animal was slaughtered, then you can't eat any part of the placenta, even though there's no fetus associated with it. Why? Because the reason is because we're going to say Siman Vlad B'Isha v'Siman Vlad B'Be'ema, because we're going to say that the Shilya is a sign that there was a fetus in both a woman and an animal, because there's no placenta without a fetus. It's just the fetus became crushed up. And so therefore we have to be concerned that maybe with this part of the placenta that went out prior to the Shlita, it was the majority of the fetus. And so therefore it's like the fetus was born. And so therefore the fetus is not permitted by the slaughter of the animal. So we see from here anyways that when the placenta goes out, we have to be concerned that maybe the fetus was born. And so therefore, what are we telling us? That you have to be concerned that maybe he was born. We already saw this halacha. The Gemara says, "Iman mimasninan hava mina diyesh mikta shilya b'lovad." So if you're going to say, if it's just from this brisa, we might have thought, or on top of 11b, that really, technically speaking, just a part of the shilya went out, and that's for him to eat. But the rest of the shilya remained inside, and it still didn't go out. That would be permitted by the slaughter. And the reason why we were strict is Gzeira Miktasa Atakua. We might have been concerned that just we'll make a decree against a portion of it because of all of it. But where by the case of the woman, we might have said we're not going to say she's tamei from the first day, because maybe we shouldn't make a Gzeira Yatsa Miktasa Mishum Kula, because when the whole placenta goes out, everybody would have seen that it made her tamei. So kamashmon. So therefore, we have Ula's teaching. Then no, that if the portion of the shilya went out, then we're going to say the fetus went out, and so therefore, by a woman, we're going to say she's tamei from a suffix on day 1. Second teaching of Ula. Amar Ula, Amar Rebbe Lazar, Bechor shenitraf betoch lamed yom, ein podino. So let's say we have a firstborn of a human being who was Rahman al-Islam murdered. We've seen this, that the enemy murders babies. We've seen them actually murder babies in Hamas, in the south of Israel. And now the Gemara has a scenario that a baby was killed within the first 30 days. You don't need to do a pigeon ben. And so therefore, for sure, if a baby died on its own, you don't need to do it because there it didn't live to 30 days. But here, we might have thought that if he was killed, you're still responsible to do the pigeon ben. I might think that you have to do a pigeon ben if the baby was killed within the 30 days. It shows a distinction. That means to say that if baby was Rahman al-Islam murdered within 30 days, or killed, you don't need to do a pigeon ben. A large animal, an ox, a donkey, can be acquired by pulling the animal towards you. That's called mashicha. Gemara says, is that really the case? How can Ula say this in the name of Rebbe Lazar? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah? We learned this in the Mishnah in Kedushin, Chafei Amud Beis. Didn't we learn b'mesira? That the animal is not acquired by pulling it to you, but when the owner of the animal hands over the reins of the animal to you. Gemara says, Hu damar ki tana. No, Ula says in the name of Rebbe Lazar, like the following Tana, the Tanya v'cham momrim zuva mashicha, that both a behema daka and a behema gasa are acquired by pulling it to you, whereas Rabbi Shimon says zuva agba. Both of them are acquired through lifting up the animal towards you. Let's say you have brothers that divide up, that inherit an estate. So they need to divide up the estate, and they divide up all the assets of the state. Ma'ashalei and shamin. Even the clothes that they wear, we're going to put into the calculation. You can have some belts that could be worth thousands of dollars, or ties. So you put that all into the valuation of the estate. But that which is on their children, you let it go. Everybody's mochel on that. You don't evaluate it because you don't want to bring the kids to court and start saying how much should their pants cost. And sometimes we don't even evaluate that which they're wearing. Why? Because when, let's say, the oldest of the brothers, we don't look at how much his clothes cost. Why? Because the state wants him. They want him, his words to be heard. They want him to look like a mensch when he goes into try selling the property. So therefore, we're not going to look at how much his clothes worth. Now we have the law of one guardian who gave over his responsibility to watch to another person. Shomer pator, and then the other person messed up. The initial shomer is going to be exempt. Or it got hurt, he didn't necessarily mess up. If he got messed up, it was a different question. But there was an accident happened, the matter was destroyed. We're going to say it's exempt. Not only a case of a watchman who was watching for nothing. Shemasar or Shomer Sachar, who he gave it over to the Shomer Sachar, gave it over to somebody who was being paid to watch. So that now the watching, the level of Shmirah is enhanced because the Shomer Sachar is responsible for theft, whereas the Shomer Chinam, the one who's watching for free, is not. Not only in that case do we say that he's exempt if he gave it over to him. Even if the original guardian was being paid to watch and he gave it over to somebody who's watching for free. So then now his level of watching is diminished because the Shomer Chinam is only responsible for negligence, not for theft. Nevertheless, we're still going to say the Shomer Sachar will be exempt. Potter, Sharei Masar Ben Das, because he gave it over to a legitimate person to watch. Rava says Shomer Shemasar Shomer Chayev. He says no. If one watchman gave it to another watchman to watch, he's liable. Not only if he gave it a Shomer Sachar, gave it to a Shomer Chinam, where the level of watching is diminished. Even if he was watching it for free and he gave it to a Shomer Sachar, he hired somebody to watch it, he's still going to be liable because the original owner said, I believe you, I gave it to you to Shomer Chinam because I trusted you if you would take an oath that you said it was an ones. But I don't trust this person by an oath, and so therefore you had no right to give it to him. Next halacha, the halacha is that if you have to collect an ass, if you want to collect some money that's owed to you, you're even allowed to collect it via slaves. Govin min avadim could even seize the slaves as a way of paying off the debt. So Amarle Rabbi Nachman Rabbi Lazar, I feel me lo mine. So he says to him, let's say the person who owed the money died and it was his orphans. Are you allowed to seize the slaves from the estate of the orphans? Gemara says that all responds to Rav Nachman lo mine. You can't borrow it you can't take the money from the person himself. Only you can't take the money from the orphans, from the estate, only from the person himself, from the borrower himself. Gemara says mine, from him. Why do you need any teaching from the slaves? Of course you can take it from the slaves. You can even take it from the cloak off of his back, the shirt off his back, you can even take from him to pay off his debt. Gemara says, no, here we're talking about Sha'asa Apotiki, where we're talking about a case where the borrower made the slaves his apotiki, meaning to say he designated the slaves as the ones who were from whom he was going to pay off the debt. And we're learning from here that it's possible. And then the slave sold, and then the borrower sold the slave to somebody else. Then he could go. Basically, you're saying that you could put a lien on the slaves and go seize it. And that's teaching us this chiddush that normally we think you can only put a lien on real estate. Here we're being told you could put a lien on a slave. So if he made his slave as a potiki, the creditor can go and collect it. Shara apoteki, let's say he made his oxen apoteki umachro and he sold it. The creditor cannot go and seize it. My time, and what's the reasoning? Highest slave kala. The reason why you can make a slave an apoteki and go collect it is because the slave, people know if the slave is sold, and therefore you can make an apoteki, you can put a lien on it. And so therefore the purchaser knows not to buy it. But with respect to just a regular movable object, people don't know if it's sold, and they don't know if it's a lien, and so the purchaser wouldn't know to be afraid. But Vasar Dinafak, so therefore after Rav Nachman left, because Rav Nachman had cited this in the name of so after Rav Nachman left, Amar Ula, so then Ula said to those who were sitting before him, Hachi Amar Rebbe Lazar, Afilu miyasme, he says, you could even collect this slave even from the estate of the heirs. And Amar Rav Nachman, so Rav Nachman, when they said what Ula said afterwards, he said, Ishtamitan Ula. Ula, like he slipped away from me. And he said to me that, so he had said to me that they could only collect it as an apoteki. He didn't say this law of a slave, meaning to say he was afraid to say it because he was worried that I would dispute him. So there was indeed a case in Pumbedi. So the Agli Rav Chana bar Bizna, and Rav Chana bar Bizna collected even from the estate. Amul Rav Nachman Zilu Adura. Go and return the money to the orphans. Otherwise, I'm going to seize your mansions, your large houses. So Amalei Rav Nachman Ha'ula Rebbe Lazar. But what about the fact that Ula and Rebbe Lazar are supposed that you can collect from the estate, from the orphans? Mara says, and Hadaina Denardai. So he says there's Ula, there's Rebbe Lazar, there's the judges of Nardai, Rav Chana bar Bizna, who say that you're allowed to do this. Mar Kaman Svirle, who's Rav Nachman holding like when he says you can't collect it from the estate? So Rav Nachman says, Amar Lei, Rav Nachman defends himself. He says, Anamas Nisa Yadaina. I have a brisa, the Tani Avimi, Pruz Bo Chalal Karka. We learned in the brisa that Avimi taught, Pruz Bo applies only if you have land. You can only do a Pruz Bo for the Shemitah if you have real estate. Veino Chalal Avadim, the Pruz Bo doesn't help if he only has slaves, meaning to say you have to be a landowner in order for approval to take effect. And also, metaltal and niktim im hakarka, movables can be bought with real estate. That's what we called agav, like by virtue of the fact you buy the courtyard, you buy everything in it. And also we say, Eino niktim im avadim, they cannot be acquired with slaves. So we see from here that slaves are not real estate. So therefore you can't, and the only thing you can collect from the estate of the orphans is if the orphans have real estate, but you can't seize the slaves. And so therefore we see slaves are not real estate, you can't collect from the orphans. And therefore I follow the price, and I disagree with all those who you cited. Okay, just before we stop, I'd like to say two things. First of all, today we're going to do Yom Kippur Katan, so I want to encourage everybody to fast until Chatzos, until 11:52 a.m. if you're physically healthy enough, only if you're physically healthy enough, because of the tremendous Ace Tzara for the Jewish people at this time. And number two is that tomorrow's Daf Yomi, since I'll be, God willing, praying Nate's at the sunrise at the White House, I want to encourage everybody. I'm going to do the Daf Yomi at 4:30 because at 5:45 at the White House, Rabbi Silver from Baltimore, I'm helping to arrange, is going to teach the Daf Yomi. And so therefore, we can't have two teachers at that moment. So I'll do our Daf at 4:30 a.m. Of course, I'll do it tonight as well, but we'll do it 4:30 a.m. will be the only morning Daf that I'll be giving tomorrow, but I'll put it on YouTube as well. And if people want to tune into Rabbi Silber's, I'll try to get the link from them today so that I could send it out if you want to tune in at 5:45 a.m. Shkoach to everybody. Everybody have a great day. Yasher koach.